Captain Mara Jennings stood in the center of the briefing room at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, her hands clasped behind her back, her jaw set firm. The room was thick with tension. 12 Marines sat before her, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, faces hard as stone. She knew what they were thinking. They didn't say it out loud. Not yet. But she could see it in the way they glanced at each other, in the smirks they tried to hide, in the way Staff Sergeant Kyle Brennan leaned back in his chair like he was watching a bad movie he didn't pay for. She was their new commanding officer. And they didn't want her. "Listen up," Mara said, her voice calm but commanding. "We deploy to Syria in 72 hours. This is a high-risk extraction. Intelligence says there are 3 American contractors being held in a compound 15 miles outside Raqqa. We go in, we get them out, we come home. Clean and fast." Silence. Then Brennan shifted in his seat. He was a big man, broad-shouldered with a scar running down his left cheek. He'd been in the Marines for 16 years. Mara had been an officer for 6. "With all due respect, Captain," Brennan said, his tone anything but respectful, "most of us have been running ops like this since before you graduated officer school." A few of the others nodded. Mara didn't blink. "Then you know how important discipline and communication are. Which is why we'll run drills every day until we deploy. No mistakes," Brennan snorted. "We don't need drills, ma'am. We need a leader who's been in the sand, not someone who got promoted because of a quota." The room went dead quiet. Mara felt the heat rise in her chest, but she kept her face stone cold. She'd heard worse. She'd been hearing worse since the day she enlisted at 18. A woman in the Marines. A woman in combat. A woman leading men. It didn't matter that she'd scored top marks in every training course. It didn't matter that she'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan and earned a Bronze Star for valor. It didn't matter that she could outshoot, outrun, and outthink half the men in this room. To them, she was still just a woman. And women, in their minds, didn't belong here. "Staff Sergeant Brennan," Mara said quietly, stepping toward him. "You have something to say, you say it to my face. You have a problem with my leadership, you file a report. But while I'm standing here, you will show respect. Are we clear?" Brennan stared at her. His jaw tightened. For a moment it looked like he might push back. But then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and said, "Crystal, ma'am." It wasn't sincere, but it was enough. Mara turned back to the group. "We leave in 3 days. Be ready." She walked out of the room with her head high, but the moment the door closed behind her, she let out a slow breath. This was going to be harder than she thought. That night, Mara sat alone in her quarters, reviewing the mission files on her laptop. The contractors were ex-military, working private security in a war zone that was supposed to be winding down. But nothing in Syria was winding down. It was a hornet's nest of militias, mercenaries, and chaos. The compound where they were being held was deep in hostile territory. The intel was shaky at best, and her team didn't trust her. She closed the laptop and rubbed her eyes. Her phone buzzed. A text from her younger sister Emily, back home in Georgia. "How's it going, Captain America?" Mara smiled despite herself. Emily was the only one who could make her laugh on days like this. She typed back, "Same old. Saving the world one doubting Marine at a time." Emily replied instantly, "They'll come around. They always do. You're a badass, sis. Don't forget it." Mara set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. She'd proven herself 100 times before. She'd do it again. The next 2 days were brutal. Mara ran the team through every drill she could think of. Close quarters combat, vehicle extraction, ambush response, communication under fire. And every step of the way, Brennan and his crew dragged their feet. They followed orders, but barely. They muttered under their breath. They moved slow. They tested her. On the second day, during a live fire drill, Corporal Danny Hayes, one of Brennan's closest buddies, accidentally fired a round too close to Mara's position. She didn't flinch. She walked right up to him, took his rifle, checked the chamber, and handed it back. "Do that again," she said coldly, "and you'll be cleaning latrines until you're old enough to collect Social Security." Hayes swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." But that night she overheard them in the mess hall. She wasn't supposed to. She'd gone back to grab a coffee and heard voices around the corner. "She's gonna get us killed," Hayes said. "No doubt," another Marine replied. "She's never led a mission like this. She's in over her head." She's only here because they needed a woman in command, Brennan added. It's all politics. And we're the ones who'll pay for it. Mara stood frozen, the coffee cup hot in her hand. She could walk around the corner. Confront them. Pull rank. But she didn't, because deep down she knew the truth. Words wouldn't change their minds. Only action would. The day of deployment came fast. The team geared up in silence. Mara checked her rifle, her sidearm, her comms. She watched her Marines load into the transport helicopter, their faces grim and focused. Brennan caught her eye as he climbed aboard. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The message was clear. Prove it. The helicopter lifted off into the gray morning sky, rotors thumping like a war drum. Mara sat near the open door, wind whipping through her hair, and stared out at the ocean below. She thought about her father, a retired Marine colonel. He'd told her once when she was 16 and told him she wanted to enlist, that the Marines would chew her up and spit her out. They won't make it easy for you, he'd said. You'll have to be twice as good to get half the respect. She'd proven him wrong before. She'd do it again. The helicopter banked east, toward the horizon, toward Syria, toward the mission that would change everything. The helicopter touched down in the desert just after midnight. The air was hot and dry even in the darkness. Mara stepped off the bird, boots hitting the sand, and immediately her senses sharpened. This wasn't training. This wasn't a drill. This was real. Around her, the team moved with practiced efficiency. Weapons up, night vision down. Radio checks whispered into headsets. They were 30 miles from the target compound. The plan was to move on foot for the first 10 miles, then link up with a local informant who'd provide vehicles for the final push. Mara scanned her team. 12 Marines, including herself, all experienced, all capable, all doubting her. Let's move, she said into her headset. They formed up in a tactical column and began the march. The desert was silent except for the crunch of boots on sand and rock. The moon was a thin crescent, barely enough light to see by. Mara kept her rifle ready, eyes scanning the horizon. Beside her, Brennan moved like a shadow. He hadn't said a word to her since they'd boarded the helicopter. That was fine. She didn't need his conversation. She needed his obedience. 2 hours into the march, they reached the link-up point, a cluster of abandoned buildings on the edge of a dried-up riverbed. The informant was supposed to be waiting. But when they arrived, the place was empty. Mara raised a fist. The team froze. She activated her comms. Overwatch, this is Viper 1. Link-up site is cold. No sign of contact. Requesting status update. Static crackled in her ear. Then a voice came through, calm, professional. Viper 1, stand by. Checking with intelligence now. Mara crouched behind a crumbling wall, her pulse steady. Around her, the Marines took defensive positions. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting, judging. The voice came back. Viper 1, informant missed his check-in 3 hours ago. Recommend you proceed without vehicle support. Target compound is 10 miles northeast. You're clear to move. Mara's jaw tightened. No vehicles meant a longer approach. More exposure. Higher risk, but they didn't have a choice. Copy that, she said. Viper 1 moving to target. She turned to her team. Change of plans. We hoof it the rest of the way. Stay sharp. Stay tight. Let's go. Brennan stepped forward. Captain, that's another 3 hours on foot through open desert. If we get spotted, we won't. Mara cut him off. We move fast and stay low. This mission doesn't change because we lost a ride. Brennan's eyes narrowed. With respect, ma'am, maybe we should call it regroup. Come back with better intel. Mara stepped closer to him, her voice low and hard. Those contractors have been in that compound for 9 days. Every hour we wait is another hour they're tortured or killed. We don't abort, we adapt. Now fall in line, Staff Sergeant. For a moment, Brennan didn't move, then he nodded once. Yes, ma'am. But she saw it in his eyes. He thought she was making a mistake. They moved through the desert like ghosts. Mara set a brutal pace. Her legs burned. Her lungs ached. But she didn't slow down. Behind her, the team kept up, but she could hear the frustration in their breathing. They were tired, annoyed, and they blamed her. 3 hours later, just before dawn, they reached a ridgeline overlooking the target compound. Mara dropped to her belly and pulled out her binoculars. The compound was exactly where the intel said it would be. A low square building surrounded by a chain-link fence. 2 guards at the front gate. No vehicles in sight. It looked quiet. Too quiet. Mara studied every detail. The windows. The roofline. The surrounding terrain. Something felt off. Brennan crawled up beside her. "Looks clear," he muttered. "Maybe," Mara said. "Or maybe they're waiting for us," Brennan frowned. Intel said minimal security. 2, maybe 3 hostiles inside. We go in fast, grab the contractors, and extract before anyone knows we're here. Mara lowered the binoculars. Intel also said we'd have an informant and vehicles. Intel isn't always right. Brennan's voice hardened. "So what do you want to do? Sit here and wait for an engraved invitation?" Mara turned to him, her eyes cold. "I want to do this smart. We don't rush in blind." "We've been doing this for years, Captain," Brennan said. "We know how to clear a building. Then you know that overconfidence gets people killed." Brennan stared at her. Then he shook his head and crawled back to the others. Mara watched him go, her chest tight. She knew what he was thinking. That she was hesitating. That she was scared. That she didn't have what it took, but she wasn't scared. She was careful, and there was a difference. Mara made the call. "We go in 30 minutes, she said. 2 teams split. Brennan, you take Hayes, Ruiz, and Cho through the front. I'll take the rest around the back. We hit them from both sides. Fast and clean. Weapons tight unless fired upon. These contractors are our priority." Brennan nodded. "Copy." The team prepped in silence. Mara checked her rifle one last time, then looked at each of her Marines. "Stay sharp," she said. "Trust your training. And trust each other. Let's bring them home." They moved down the ridge in 2 groups. Mara's team circled wide, approaching the compound from the rear. Her heart was steady, her breathing controlled. This was what she'd trained for. Through her night vision, she saw Brennan's team reach the front gate. She keyed her radio. "Viper 2 in position." "Viper 1 in position," Brennan replied. "On my mark," Mara whispered. 3, 2, 1. Execute. Both teams moved. Mara's group hit the back door. She stacked up with her Marines, then nodded. Corporal Lindsay kicked the door in. They flooded inside. The first room was empty. The second room was empty. Then Mara heard it. Shouting. Gunfire. From the front of the building, her blood went cold. "Contact front." Brennan's voice exploded over the radio. "We've got multiple hostiles. This wasn't 2 or 3, this is a damn platoon." Mara's mind raced. "Fall back. Viper 2, fall back to the gate." "Negative," Brennan shouted. "We're pinned down." They knew we were coming. Mara's heart slammed in her chest. It was an ambush, and her team had walked right into it. Mara didn't hesitate. "Lindsay, Ortiz with me. The rest of you secure the back and cover our 6. She sprinted through the compound, rifle up, moving toward the sound of gunfire. The front room was chaos. Brennan and his team were pinned behind a concrete barrier. Rounds were tearing through the walls. At least a dozen hostiles were firing from elevated positions inside the compound. This wasn't a holding site. It was a trap. Mara's mind flashed to the missed informant. The bad intel. The too quiet compound. They'd been set up, and Brennan had ignored her warnings and walked right into it. But there was no time for blame, only action. Mara keyed her radio. "Overwatch, this is Viper 1. We are under heavy fire. Request immediate air support and extract." Viper 1, fastest response is 20 minutes out. 20 minutes, her Marines didn't have 20 minutes. Mara turned to Lindsay. "Suppressing fire on my mark." "Brennan, when I move, you move. We're getting out of here. Copy," Brennan shouted back. Mara took a breath. Then she stepped into the kill zone. Mara moved like lightning. She burst from cover, rifle up, firing controlled bursts at the hostile positions. Lindsay and Ortiz flanked her, laying down suppressing fire that forced the enemy to duck behind their barricades. "Brennan, move now," Mara shouted. Brennan didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed Hayes by the vest and hauled him backward. Ruiz and Cho followed, firing as they retreated. Rounds cracked past Mara's head. She dropped to one knee behind a stone pillar, changing magazines with practiced speed. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. "Fall back to the rear exit," she ordered. "Covering fire, alternating, go!" The team moved in controlled chaos. Lindsay fired, then ran. Ortiz fired, then ran. Mara stayed in position, her rifle barking, keeping the enemy pinned. A hostile popped up from behind a window. Mara put 2 rounds center mass. He dropped, another appeared on the rooftop. She swung her rifle up and fired. He fell backward out of sight. "Captain, we're clear." Brennan's voice came through her headset. Mara fired 3 more rounds, then turned and sprinted for the back of the building. Bullets chased her. One round hit the wall inches from her head, spraying concrete dust into her eyes. She didn't slow down. She burst through the back door and into the open desert air. Her team was there, weapons up, covering the exits. "Head count," Mara shouted. "All accounted for." Lindsay called back. Mara's chest heaved. They were out. But they weren't safe. From inside the compound, she could hear shouting. Engines revving. The enemy was mobilizing. "They'll be on us in 60 seconds, Brennan said, breathing hard. "We need to move." Mara scanned the desert. No cover, no vehicles. Just open sand and rocks for miles. They were exposed and the enemy had trucks. Her mind raced. Then she saw it. A dried-up wadi, a desert ravine, about 200 meters to the west. Deep enough to hide in. Narrow enough to defend. "There," she pointed. "We move to that wadi and hold until extract arrives." "That's a kill box," Brennan argued. "If they pin us down in there, then we make them pay for every inch." Mara snapped. "We stay here, we die in the open. We move, we have a chance. Now run." The team didn't argue. They ran. Mara stayed at the rear, rifle ready, eyes on the compound. She saw the first truck roll out of the gate, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. "Contact rear," she shouted. "Keep moving." The truck's mounted gun opened up. Rounds kicked up sand all around them. Mara dropped to one knee, aimed, and fired at the driver. The windshield shattered. The truck swerved and crashed into the fence, but 2 more trucks were already rolling out. "Go! Go! Go!" Mara screamed. The team reached the wadi and dropped into it. Mara was the last one in. She slid down the sandy slope and took up a firing position at the edge. "Set a perimeter," she ordered. Overlapping fields of fire. Nobody gets through. The Marines moved fast. They'd done this 1,000 times. Within seconds, they had the wadi locked down. Mara pulled out her radio. "Overwatch, this is Viper 1. We are taking heavy fire and need immediate extract. Our position is 200 meters west of the target compound. Viper 1, extract is inbound. ETA 15 minutes. Hold your position." 15 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. The truck stopped at the edge of effective range. Mara counted at least 20 hostiles dismounting. They were spreading out, flanking. They knew what they were doing. "Here they come," Brennan muttered beside her. Mara's jaw set. "Then let's give them hell." The firefight erupted like thunder. The enemy came in fast, trying to overwhelm them with numbers. But Mara's Marines were disciplined, trained, and angry. Every shot counted. Mara fired in controlled bursts, picking her targets carefully. A hostile running left, down. Another advancing with an RPG, down. A third trying to flank, down. Beside her, Brennan was a machine. He'd switched to his M249 light machine gun and was shredding the enemy's advance. "Reloading," Hayes shouted. "Covering," Lindsay called back, stepping into his field of fire. The team worked like a single organism. No wasted movement. No panic. But the enemy kept coming. An RPG streaked overhead and exploded against the far wall of the wadi. Sand and rock rained down. "They're trying to collapse the wadi on us," Ortiz shouted. Mara's mind worked fast. If the enemy brought the walls down, they'd be buried or exposed. She keyed her radio. "Overwatch, we need air support now." "We're about to be overrun." "Viper 1, gunships are 8 minutes out." "Hold on, 8 minutes." Mara looked at her team. They were holding. Barely. Then she saw movement on the ridge above them. 3 hostiles with RPGs, positioning for a direct shot into the wadi. If they fired from that angle, there'd be nowhere to hide. "Contact high," Mara shouted, swinging her rifle up, but they were too far. Her rifle couldn't reach them in time. Brennan saw them too. "We're dead if they fire." Mara's eyes locked on the ridge. Then she made a decision. "Lindsay, take command. Keep them off our backs." "Captain, what are you—" Mara didn't wait. She slung her rifle and pulled out her sidearm, then she climbed out of the wadi. "Captain," Brennan shouted. "What the hell are you doing?" Mara didn't answer. She sprinted across the open desert, bullets kicking up sand around her, heading straight for the ridge. It was suicide, but it was the only way. Mara's legs burned as she ran. Rounds snapped past her ears. One grazed her shoulder, tearing through her uniform. She ignored the pain. She reached the base of the ridge and started climbing. Her hands found purchase on the rocks. Her boots dug into the sand. She pulled herself up one handhold at a time. Above her, the hostiles were setting up their shot. She could hear them shouting. 10 feet to go. 5. Mara pulled herself over the edge, sidearm already in her hand. The first hostile turned. His eyes went wide. Mara fired twice. He dropped. The second hostile swung his rifle around. Mara dove left, rolled, and fired 3 times. He went down. The third hostile had the RPG on his shoulder, aimed at the wadi below. Mara didn't think. She launched herself at him. She hit him like a freight train, knocking the RPG off target. It fired wild, the rocket screaming off into the desert and exploding harmlessly. The hostile tried to draw a knife. Mara slammed her elbow into his jaw, then put 2 rounds in his chest. He collapsed. Mara stood on the ridge, breathing hard, bleeding, covered in dust and sweat. Below, her team was still fighting, but the enemy advance had stalled. They'd seen what she'd done. Seen one Marine take out 3 of their best, and they hesitated. That hesitation was all her team needed. Mara keyed her radio. "Lindsay, light them up. Don't give them a second to think." "Roger that, Captain." The Marines poured fire into the enemy position. The hostiles broke. They scattered, retreating back toward their trucks. Mara watched them go, her chest heaving. Then she heard it, the beautiful sound of rotors. She turned and saw 2 Apache gunships screaming in low over the desert, their cannons already spinning up. The Apaches opened fire. The enemy trucks exploded in balls of flame. The few hostiles still standing were cut down in seconds. It was over. Mara slid down the ridge and limped back to the wadi. Her team was waiting. Brennan stepped forward, his face unreadable. Then he extended his hand. "That," he said quietly, "was the gutsiest thing I've ever seen." Mara looked at his hand, then she took it. "We're not done yet," she said. "We still have contractors to find." Brennan nodded. "Then let's finish this." They went back into the compound. This time, there was no resistance. In a hidden basement behind a false wall, they found them, 3 American contractors, beaten, starved, but alive. Mara knelt beside the first man. "We're United States Marines. We're here to bring you home." The man's eyes filled with tears. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. "I knew someone would come." Mara helped him to his feet. "Let's go." The extraction helicopter landed 10 minutes later. Mara watched her team load the contractors aboard. They moved with precision, with pride, and when Brennan climbed into the bird, he looked back at her and nodded. No words, just respect. Mara was the last one on. As the helicopter lifted off, she looked down at the burning compound below. They'd walked into a trap, but they'd walked out alive, because she'd led them. The helicopter flew through the morning sky, the sun rising over the desert like a ball of fire. Inside, the team sat in silence. The contractors were wrapped in blankets, receiving medical attention from the corpsman. Hayes had a bandage around his arm. Ruiz had a cut above his eye. But they were alive, all of them. Mara sat near the open door, staring out at the endless sand below. Her shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed her, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still back in that wadi, on that ridge. In those moments when everything could have gone wrong, but it hadn't, because her team had held the line, and because she'd made the hard call when it mattered most. Brennan sat across from her, his weapon resting between his knees. He'd been quiet since they'd boarded, but now he leaned forward, his voice just loud enough to be heard over the rotors. "You saved our lives back there, Captain." Mara looked at him. His face was sincere. No sarcasm, no mockery, just truth. "We saved each other," she said simply. Brennan shook his head. "No, we walked into that ambush because I pushed too hard. I didn't listen to you. I thought I knew better." He paused, his jaw tight. "I was wrong. And if you hadn't pulled us out, we'd all be dead." The other Marines were listening now. Hayes, Ruiz, Lindsay, Cho, all of them. Mara met Brennan's eyes. "You're a good Marine, Staff Sergeant. One of the best. But this team only works if we trust each other." "All of us," Brennan nodded slowly. "From now on, Captain, you've got my trust and my respect." He extended his hand again. This time, Mara shook it firmly. Around them, the other Marines nodded. One by one, they met her eyes. And in those eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Belief. Not in her rank. Not in her orders. In her. They landed at the forward operating base 2 hours later. The moment the helicopter touched down, a crowd of personnel rushed forward. Medical teams, officers, reporters embedded with the unit. The contractors were taken to the medical tent immediately. Mara and her team were ushered toward the command building for debrief. But before she could take 3 steps, a colonel approached. His name was Foster, and he was the senior officer on base. He was tall, gray-haired, and had the kind of face that had seen too many wars. "Captain Jennings," he said, his voice gruff. "I heard what happened out there." Mara stood at attention. "Yes, sir." Foster studied her for a long moment. "Intel failed you. The informant was compromised. The enemy knew you were coming. That compound was a kill box." "Yes, sir," Mara said. "But we adapted. We completed the mission." Foster's eyes narrowed. "You also went outside the chain of command. You made calls in the field that weren't in the mission brief. You put yourself and your team at risk." Mara's heart sank. She'd done everything right. She'd saved her Marines. She'd brought the contractors home. And now she was being reprimanded. But before she could respond, Brennan stepped forward. "Sir, with respect," Brennan said firmly. "Captain Jennings made the only calls that could have saved us. She read the situation better than anyone. She led from the front. And she risked her life to protect this team. If anyone deserves recognition, it's her." Foster turned to Brennan, surprised. Then Hayes stepped forward. "He's right, sir. She's the reason we're standing here." Lindsay nodded. She didn't hesitate. Not once. One by one, every Marine on that team stepped forward, standing beside their captain. Foster looked at them, then back at Mara. A slow smile crept across his face. "Well then," he said, "I suppose I'll have to rewrite my report." He extended his hand. "Outstanding work, Captain. You and your team just pulled off one of the gutsiest rescues I've seen in 30 years. Mara shook his hand, relief flooding through her. "Thank you, sir." Foster nodded. "Get some rest." "You've earned it." As he walked away, Mara turned to her team. They were battered, exhausted, covered in dust and blood. But they were smiling. "Drinks are on me when we get stateside," Brennan said with a grin. Mara laughed. "I'll hold you to that, Staff Sergeant." 3 weeks later, Mara stood in a packed briefing room at Camp Lejeune. The entire battalion was there, officers, enlisted families, and at the front of the room stood the Commandant of the Marine Corps himself. Mara's heart pounded as she stood at attention. The Commandant stepped forward, holding a small blue box. "Captain Mara Jennings," he said, his voice carrying through the room, "for extraordinary heroism in combat operations, for leadership under fire, for selfless sacrifice in the face of overwhelming odds, it is my honor to present you with the Silver Star." The room erupted in applause. Mara felt her throat tighten. She blinked back tears as the Commandant pinned the medal to her uniform. But when she looked out into the crowd, it wasn't the Commandant she saw, it was her team. Brennan stood in the front row, clapping louder than anyone. Beside him, Hayes, Lindsay, Ruiz, Cho, and the rest. They weren't just clapping. They were cheering. For her. Mara's father was there too, in his old dress blues, tears streaming down his weathered face. Beside him, her sister Emily was crying and laughing at the same time. The Commandant leaned in close. "You've made us all proud, Captain. But more than that, you've changed minds. You've proven what real leadership looks like." Mara nodded, her voice steady. "Thank you, sir. But I couldn't have done it without my Marines." The Commandant smiled. "That's what makes you a great leader." After the ceremony, Mara found Brennan waiting outside. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking almost sheepish. "Hey, Captain," he said. "Hey yourself," Mara replied. Brennan took a breath. "I owe you an apology. A real one. For the way I treated you. For doubting you, for being a jackass." Mara crossed her arms, but there was a smile on her face. "You were a jackass." "Yeah," Brennan admitted. "I was, and I'm sorry. You're the best officer I've ever served under. And I mean that." Mara's smile softened. "Apology accepted, Staff Sergeant." Brennan grinned. "Good, because I just got word we're being deployed again in 6 months, and I requested to stay on your team." Mara raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" "I don't run easy missions," Brennan laughed. "Yeah, I noticed. But I'd rather follow you into hell than anyone else into a cakewalk." Mara extended her hand. Then let's do it again. Brennan shook it. Semper Fi, Captain. Semper Fi. That night, Mara sat alone on the beach near base watching the waves roll in. Her phone buzzed. A message from Emily. Saw the video of the ceremony. I'm so proud of you I could burst. You're my hero, sis. Mara smiled and typed back. Just doing my job, Emily replied instantly. No, you're changing the world. One doubter at a time. Mara set the phone down and looked out at the ocean. She thought about the girl she'd been at 18. The one who'd walked into the recruiter's office and been told she didn't belong. The one who'd been mocked, doubted, and underestimated every step of the way. And she thought about the woman she'd become, a leader, a warrior. Marine. She'd proven herself 100 times, but this time was different, because this time, the people who doubted her the most had become the people who believed in her the hardest. And that, Mara realized, was the real victory, not the medal, not the recognition, but the respect, earned not through words, but through action, through sacrifice, through leading from the front when it mattered most. Mara stood and brushed the sand off her uniform. Tomorrow, there would be new missions, new challenges, new doubters to prove wrong, but tonight she allowed herself to feel proud, because she'd done what so many said she couldn't. She'd led Marines into hell, and she'd brought every single one of them home.